My hands went cold before my mind even understood why, the moment I heard her voice on the other end of that call. Matilda. Just my name, trembling, like she'd been holding it in her mouth for hours before she found the nerve to say it. I hadn't heard that voice in 5 years. Not since the day we buried my husband and she gripped my arm at the graveside and told me this family built everything he had, and I better not think it ended with me. My name is Matilda Tillery Mabry, and I had spent 5 years rebuilding a life out of the silence that followed that day. "Erlene," I said, and I heard how flat my own voice came out, guarded, like I was bracing for a blow I couldn't see coming yet. "I know it's been a long time," she said. "I know I don't have any right to call you out of nowhere like this." She wasn't wrong about that. 6 weeks earlier, my attorney had sent her and Emmett formal notice, the kind that goes out certified, signature required, letting them know I intended to move forward with selling the house Elsie left me, the house that legally still tied me to people I hadn't spoken to since his funeral. I never got a response, not a call, not a letter, not one word back, until now. "I've been thinking a lot," Erlene went on, "about everything, about how wrong it was, letting all this time pass. Emmett has too. We were hoping, if you'd let us, we could come see you, sit with you, just talk, before it's too late to fix any of it." Before it's too late. Something about the way she said it sat wrong in my chest, too precise for a woman who claimed she was calling on instinct and heartbreak. But grief makes you want to believe the softest version of things, and I hadn't let myself hope for anything from that side of my family in 5 years. Real quick. If you're watching this, drop where you're tuning in from tonight. I always love seeing that. "I don't know, Erline," I said, and I meant it as a door closing, not an opening. "Please," she said, and her voice cracked in a way that sounded so much like grief, I forgot, just for a second, to be careful. "I don't want to carry this to my grave, Matilda. I don't want Emmett to either. Just a visit. That's all I'm asking." I told her yes before I'd fully decided to. Some part of me was already picturing it, the 4 of us, or what was left of the 4 of us, finally sitting in the same room without the funeral hanging over everything. Some part of me wanted, more than I wanted to admit, for this family to be whole again. Even a little. "Thank you," she whispered. And then, quieter, almost to herself, "You won't regret this." We hung up not long after, and I sat there in my kitchen holding a phone that had gone silent, looking over at Elsie's picture on the shelf, the one from our 10th anniversary, him laughing at something just out of frame. I wanted to believe his mother had finally softened. I wanted to believe 5 years of silence could end with something as simple as an apology. I had no way of knowing that phone call was never about making peace with me at all. They pulled into my driveway a little after 2 in the afternoon, and Erline was out of the car before it even finished rolling to a stop, arms already open like she'd been holding that hug for 5 years and couldn't wait one more second to give it. "Look at you," she said, holding my face in both hands the way she used to when Elsie was still alive. "Look at you, baby." Emmett came around slower, hanging back near the car with his hands in his pockets, offering me a smile that looked practiced, like he'd rehearsed it on the drive over. "Matilda," he said. And that was all. Like my name was enough. We went inside, and for a while it felt almost normal. Erline pulled out her phone and showed me pictures I'd never seen. Elsie as a boy, missing a tooth, grinning at some birthday party decades before I knew him. She laughed, remembering things I couldn't have known, and for the first time in years, I let myself laugh too. Easy, unguarded. Later, I walked them out back to see the garden, and that's when I noticed Emmett trailing a step behind us, favoring his left side just slightly, like his hip was giving him trouble. I didn't think much of it. People get older. Bodies wear down. Next door, Garvin was out watering his hedge, and he looked up when he heard us in the yard. I waved, and he waved back, but his eyes stayed on Emmett a beat too long. He didn't say anything, just kept watering, quiet, fixing that uneven step in his mind. The drag in the left leg, the particular rhythm of it, the kind of detail a person's eye catches and holds without meaning to. Something about it nagged at him faintly. Some echo from years back at Elsie's funeral, but he didn't chase the thought. He let it sit, unremarkable, and went back to his hedge. Back on the porch, Emmett asked, out of nowhere, where exactly the property line ran on the east side, past the old fence. I told him I wasn't sure, that I'd never had it surveyed since Elsie passed. Just curious, he said, too quickly, eyes flicking toward Erline for half a second before he looked away. He's always been the practical one, Erline said, laughing softly, reaching over to pat his arm. Numbers, boundaries, all of that. Comes from working with his hands so long. She said it smooth, easy, like she'd already known the question was coming and had an answer ready before he even finished asking it. I let it go, told myself it was nothing, that grief makes people strange in small ways, curious about things that don't matter, searching for solid ground wherever they can find it. That night, after dinner, Erline stepped out onto the porch to take a call. I wasn't trying to listen. I was just passing the hallway window when I heard her voice drop low, clipped, entirely different from the warmth she'd carried all day. No, she said. Not yet. I said not yet. I stopped walking. Stood there in the dark hallway, my hands still on the wall, waiting to hear more. But she must have sensed something, because her voice dropped even lower, and then she laughed, bright and easy again. The porch light catching her profile as she turned toward the yard like she was just chatting with an old friend about nothing at all. I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself 5 years of silence didn't give me the right to start suspecting her the moment she walked back through my door. I went to bed, telling myself that. I wasn't sure by morning that I still believed it. Dinner was quiet at first, just the sound of forks against plates, until Erline set hers down and said, soft, almost to herself, Elsie built so much from so little. You know that, don't you, Matilda? I know, I said, and I meant it. I'd watched him build it year after year, long before either of them came back into the picture. He didn't do it alone, though, she went on, still gentle, still wistful, like she was simply remembering rather than making a point. His daddy and I put everything we had into helping him get that first piece of land. Emmett worked alongside him for years before you two ever met. I nodded, because it was true, some of it. Elsie had told me himself early on how his family helped him start out. I'd never begrudged them that. I'd never had reason to. It's just hard, Erline said, watching everything he built end up somewhere none of us have any say in anymore. The table went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with silence and everything to do with what wasn't being said. I felt the old resentment from the funeral rise up in the room again, the same current that had run under Erline's grip on my arm that day at the graveside, except now it moved slower, dressed up as nostalgia instead of accusation. We're not saying you don't deserve what he left you, Emmett said suddenly, cutting through the quiet. We're just saying, some of that was owed to us too. It should have… Emmett. Erline's voice cut in sharp just for a second, before smoothing right back over. That's not what tonight is about. We're here to be a family again, not to talk about things that don't matter anymore. You're right, Emmett said, quiet now, eyes down at his plate. Forget I said anything. But I couldn't forget it. Not the way he'd said owed, flat and certain, like it was a fact he'd been carrying around for years, waiting for the right moment to set down. I sat there finishing a meal I could no longer taste, understanding for the first time since that phone call that this visit wasn't only about grief. There was something underneath it, something about the house, about what Elsie left me, that neither of them had said outright, but both of them were circling. I told myself people say strange things when they're grieving. I told myself Erline had smoothed it over so quickly because she meant it, because she really did just want peace. I wanted, badly, for that to be true. Later that night, long after the dishes were done and the house had gone quiet, I got up for a glass of water and found Emmett standing in the hallway outside my home office, hand resting on the doorframe like he'd been standing there a while. "Sorry," he said, straightening up fast. "I was looking for the bathroom. Guess I got turned around." The bathroom was on the other side of the house, past the kitchen, nowhere near where he was standing. He knew that. He'd used it twice already that day. "It's just down the hall," I said, keeping my voice light, though something in my chest had gone very still. "Right," he said, laughing it off, a little too easy. "Old house, I guess. Easy to get lost in." I watched him walk away, and I stood there a long moment after he'd gone, my hand resting on the frame of my own office door, wondering why a grown man would mistake that hallway for anything at all. The last morning came softer than I expected. Sunlight through the kitchen curtains, coffee going cold, while we said the kind of goodbyes that make you believe something has actually healed. 3 days wasn't near enough, Erline said, wrapping both arms around me at the door. "We have to do this again soon. Promise me that." "I promise," I said, and for the first time since that phone call 6 weeks ago, I meant it without any hesitation trailing behind it. Emmett carried their bags out to the car himself, quieter than he'd been the whole visit, and I told myself that was just him, a man more comfortable with actions than words. He hugged me too, brief and stiff, but a hug all the same, and I held on to that. We loaded everything into my car to make the drive to the airport together, and I was halfway through checking the trunk when Erline touched my elbow. "Let me run back and lock up for you," she said. "You go on and get the rest of this settled. I know this house better than you'd think. I want to walk through it one more time anyway. Remember a few things, if that's all right." "You don't have to do that," I said. "I want to." She smiled, and it was warm, the kind of smile that made you feel foolish for ever doubting it. "Let an old woman have her moment, Matilda. Please." There was something in the way she said please, a beat too measured, like she'd practiced the whole sentence somewhere on the drive over that morning. I didn't catch it as strange. 3 days of soft mornings and old photographs had worn my guard down further than I realized, and by then locking a door behind her felt like the smallest thing in the world to trust her with. I caught it as tender. I told her thank you, and I meant that too. She went back inside while Emmett and I waited by the car, and when she came out a few minutes later, purse in hand, she gave the door one small tug to show it was shut tight, and I never thought to ask her twice. The drive to Raleigh-Durham was easy, full of the kind of conversation I hadn't had with either of them in 5 years. Erline pointing out changes along the highway, Emmett laughing at something on the radio. All of it so ordinary, it ached. I pulled up to departures and helped carry their bags to the curb, and Erline held my face in her hands one more time, the same way she had the day they arrived. "Thank you for letting us back in," she said. "You don't know what this means." "Thank you for coming," I told her, and I believed, standing there in that noise of car horns and rolling suitcases, that whatever damage had sat between us for 5 years had finally started closing over. I watched them walk through security, Erline waving once before she disappeared past the checkpoint, easy and light. Emmett went through a step behind her, and just before he turned the corner out of sight, he looked back at me. It wasn't a wave, it wasn't a smile. It was something else, something I couldn't name in the moment, gone almost as soon as I saw it. And I stood there a second too long trying to understand what I'd just seen on his face before the crowd swallowed him whole. I told myself it was nothing. Emotion, relief, the strangeness of goodbyes. I got back in my car and started the drive home, humming along to the radio, believing, for the first time in 5 years, that my family might actually be whole again. I had no idea what I was driving back into. I was 15 minutes from home, radio still humming low, when my phone lit up with Garvin's name. And something about seeing it there at that hour made my stomach drop before he even said a word. Matilda. His voice was tight, none of the easy warmth I was used to from 10 years of waving at him over the fence. Don't go home yet. You hear me? Don't pull into that driveway. Garvin, what's wrong? I don't know exactly, he said, but somebody was in your house not 20 minutes ago. Came out the side door moving strange, favoring one leg, kind of dragging it a little. Same walk I noticed on your brother-in-law 2 days back, out in your yard. I know that sounds foolish, but I need you to check your cameras before you go any further. Please. My hands went cold around the wheel. I told myself it couldn't be. That Emmett was somewhere over North Carolina airspace right now. That I'd watched him disappear through security with my own eyes less than an hour ago. Check the cameras, Matilda, Garvin said again. Quieter now, like he could hear me not moving. Just check them first. I pulled onto the shoulder, hazards ticking, and opened the app with fingers that wouldn't cooperate, missing the icon twice before it finally opened. My whole body was shaking in a way I couldn't control, some part of me already bracing for whatever I was about to see. The footage loaded slow, and then there he was. A figure in my home office, face covered by a hood pulled low and a scarf wrapped high, moving through my file drawers with a kind of calm, unhurried focus, like he had all the time he needed. He lifted a folder, flipped through it, slid papers into a bag at his side. Then the angle changed. Exterior camera, side of the house, and the same figure crouched low near the gas meter, working at something with his hands, patient, deliberate, before standing and walking off down the block like he had nowhere in particular to be. I sat frozen on that shoulder, cars rushing past me, watching it a second time because my mind refused to accept it the first. The build, the stillness, the very slight drag in the left leg as he walked away. The same drag Garvin had just described, the same one I'd half noticed myself in my own backyard 2 days before and thought nothing of. Except, Emmett was in the sky right now. Or so I'd believed with my whole chest an hour ago, waving him off at a gate I'd watched him walk through myself. My throat closed around a sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a sob. Every warm thing from the last 3 days curdled at once, the hugs, the old photographs, Erline's hands on my face, all of it collapsing into something I couldn't yet name, only feel, cold and total, spreading through my chest like the ground had opened beneath the whole visit. My hands were still shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone steady enough to dial. I don't remember deciding to call. I just remember the numbers, 3 of them, and a woman's voice asking what my emergency was, and my own voice coming out thin and strange, like it belonged to someone else entirely. I heard myself say. I don't know what's happening. Someone was in my house. Please, please send someone. I sat there on the side of the road with my hazards blinking into the dark, waiting, no longer sure I knew this family at all. 2 patrol cars and a gas company truck were already at my house by the time they let me come off the shoulder, lights turning slow circles against the dark. And I sat in my car at the curb for a full minute before I could make myself get out. An officer met me halfway up the walk, hand raised, gentle but firm. "Ma'am, we need you to stay back a little longer. Your side door was unlocked when we arrived. We've got a technician checking your gas line right now." "Unlocked," I repeated, and the word landed heavier than it should have. I remembered Erline's hand on my elbow that morning, her voice soft and sure. "Let me run back and lock up for you." A man in a utility jacket came around the side of the house a few minutes later, speaking low to one of the officers before he turned to me. "Ma'am, I'm going to be straight with you. That fitting at your meter didn't fail on its own. Somebody loosened it by hand. Gas has been leaking into your crawl space and kitchen line for a while now." "Meaning what?" I said, though some part of me already understood. "Meaning if you'd walked in and flipped a light switch or your stove had kicked on or anything at all had thrown a spark," he said, careful with each word, "we wouldn't be having this conversation." I stood there on my own front lawn and felt the ground tilt under me in a way that had nothing to do with the concrete. This wasn't a break-in. This wasn't someone trying to frighten me. Someone had tried to end my life and made it look like an accident I'd never have questioned. An officer walked me through the side door once they'd cleared the house, and my home office told its own story before anyone said a word. Drawers pulled halfway out, folders shifted from where I always kept them. It took me only a moment to see what was gone. My attorney's most recent letters, the ones laying out the exact timeline for the partition sale. The copies of the life estate deed I kept filed behind them. Whoever had been in my house hadn't just wanted me gone. They'd wanted to know exactly how much time they thought they had left before losing everything. And now, however, this had failed, they still knew. A detective introduced himself while the technicians finished up outside, notepad in hand, voice even and unhurried, in a way that felt almost worse than urgency would have. He asked about the visit, about who'd been in the house, how long they'd stayed, whether anyone had been alone in any particular room. Then, almost in passing, he mentioned they'd already put in a formal request to the airline for boarding and gate records from that morning's flight, and expected something back within a day or two. I answered everything as steadily as I could, though my hands hadn't fully stopped shaking since the shoulder of that highway. Something in me was changing even as I stood there, fear curdling into something colder, quieter, something that didn't cry anymore but started, instead, to count. The detective closed his notepad and looked at me directly. No softness in it now, just the plain weight of the question itself. "Mrs. Mabry," he said, "is there anyone who would benefit from your death?" They asked Garvin to come next door and give his account while I sat in my own living room, a cup of coffee going cold in my hands, listening through the open window to a conversation I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. "I've known her 10 years, Garvin was saying, steady, unhurried, the way he always talked. "I was out watering my hedge 2 days ago when her in-laws arrived, watched them walk through the yard together, noticed the younger one, Emmett, favoring his left leg the whole time, dragging it just slightly with every other step. Didn't think much of it then." "And tonight?" the detective asked. "Tonight I saw a man leave that side door moving the exact same way. Same drag, same leg, same rhythm to it. I've watched that man walk across a yard 2 days ago in broad daylight. I know what I saw." I sat very still, my coffee forgotten, feeling something in my chest give way slow and quiet, like a floor settling under weight it was never built to hold. 2 days. Not some worn memory from a funeral half a decade gone, but 2 days, plain and recent. A man's walk fixed clear in Garvin's mind because he'd watched it happen right there in my yard. I wanted, even then, some other explanation. A coincidence. A stranger who happened to walk the same way. My mind reached for anything that wasn't Emmett's face behind that mask, because the alternative meant the two people I'd hugged goodbye at that airport gate had walked back into my house to end my life while I still believed them somewhere over the state, headed home. The detective came inside a few minutes later, notepad still in hand. Mrs. Mabry, based on the physical description, the timeline, and what was taken from your office, we're formally naming both your brother-in-law and your mother-in-law as persons of interest in this investigation. Both of them, I said, though I already knew the answer before he gave it. Someone had unlocked that door. Someone had made sure it stayed that way. We're not accusing anyone of anything yet, he said. But we don't ignore what the evidence tells us either. I nodded, though some part of me was no longer really in that room. I was back at the airport curb, Erline's hands on my face. Thank you for letting us back in. You don't know what this means. I understood now, sitting there, exactly what it had meant. And the grief I'd carried for a reconciliation I thought I'd finally gotten back began curdling into something with teeth. The detectives left not long after, promising to be in touch once forensics came back on the meter and the documents were logged. I sat alone in my kitchen for a long while, the house too quiet, my own hands finally steady for the first time since Garvin's call on that highway shoulder. My phone buzzed on the counter, and for a moment I almost didn't look. When I did, Erlene's name sat there above a single line of text, sent like nothing at all had happened. We heard something happened. Please call us. I stared at those words until the screen dimmed on its own, my thumb hovering over the reply, my anger settling into something colder and far more patient than anything I'd felt all night. I let a full hour pass before I called her back, long enough to steady my voice, long enough to decide exactly how much of myself I was willing to show her. Matilda, thank God. Erline picked up before the second ring finished, breath catching like she'd been holding the phone in her hand the whole time. We've been sick with worry. What happened? Are you all right? Someone broke into my house, I said, keeping my voice even, tired, exactly the way a woman who just survived something terrible should sound. The police are handling it. Broke in? Matilda, my God. Were you home? Did they take anything? I wasn't home, I said. Thankfully. Thank God, she said again, and the relief in her voice was so smooth, so perfectly pitched, that a week earlier I would have believed every syllable of it. Now I sat there listening for the seams instead of the warmth. Do the police have any idea who did it? She asked. Are they saying anything? What did they take? Do you know yet? I noticed it then, plain as anything. Not once had she asked if I was hurt, if I was scared, if I needed her to come back. Every question circled the investigation itself, tight and specific, like she was trying to map how much ground she still had left to stand on. They're still looking into everything, I said. I don't know much more than that. Well, that's good. That they're being thorough, she said too quickly. You should know your rights, though, Matilda. Sometimes police go through things, take things, and it takes forever to get them back. Did they say if they found the will or anything about the property? I'd hate for something like that to just go missing in all this. I went very still on my end of the line. I hadn't told her anything was missing. I hadn't said a single word about the deed, or the sale, or the papers gone from my office drawers. And yet she'd reached for exactly those things, unprompted, dressed up as concern for my rights. I didn't say anything was taken, Erline, I said quietly. A pause, half a second too long. I just assumed. With a break-in, people take things, don't they? A small laugh, brittle at the edges. I'm just worried about you. That's all this is. I know, I said, giving her nothing. My voice as warm and empty as hers had been the whole call. I should go. The detective's expecting a call from me. Of course, she said. Call us the second you know more, please. I hung up and sat there in the dark of my kitchen a long moment, turning over every word she'd said until I picked the phone back up and dialed my attorney instead. It's late. I know, I said when he answered. But I need to tell you something. I think she already knows what's missing from that office. I never told her a thing. My attorney's office smelled like coffee and old paper, and he didn't waste time on pleasantries when I sat down across from him the next morning. I want to walk you through exactly what was taken, he said, sliding a folder across the desk. Because I don't think this was random, and I don't think it was about hiding anything. What do you mean? The documents missing from your office weren't the kind that let someone forge a new deed or fake a signature, he said. They were your correspondence with me, the sale timeline, the filing dates, copies of the original life estate deed. That's not forgery material, Matilda. That's a map. I sat with that a moment, feeling the shape of it settle into place. They wanted to know how much time they had. Exactly. Every date I'd sent you, every deadline for the partition sale, was in that folder. Whoever took it now knows precisely how long they thought they had before this house stopped being something they could still inherit. He leaned back. Which tells me the break-in wasn't the whole plan. It was preparation for whatever came next. I thought of the gas line, the tool marks, how close preparation had come to becoming something final, and I said nothing, because there was nothing soft left in me to say it with. His phone rang before I could respond, and he answered it briskly, listened, jaw tightening as the call went on. When he hung up, he looked at me with the kind of stillness that told me before he even spoke that something had shifted. That was Emmett's attorney, he said. He's requesting a delay in the partition proceedings, citing family matters pending, given the ongoing investigation. Says it isn't appropriate to litigate the estate while a criminal matter involving the same family is active. That's convenient, I said, flat. It's more than convenient, he said. It's calculated. If that delay is granted, it pushes us past the court date we've already been assigned for the sale hearing. We'd have to start over, back of the docket, months out at least, which means the exact runway those stolen documents told them they needed. That's precisely what this delay would hand them. I felt something in my chest go very quiet, very clear, the last soft edge of fear finally hardening into something I could use instead of just carry. So, they didn't just want to know how much time they had, I said. They're trying to buy more. That's what it looks like, he said. And I need you to understand something else, Matilda, because I won't sugarcoat it for you. If we don't fight this delay, and fight it hard, we could lose our window entirely. He set the phone down, folded his hands, and looked at me directly. You survived one attempt already. If they were willing to go that far once, and this delay buys them exactly what they need to try again, I don't think they stop here. I sat there, in that quiet office, hands steady now in a way they hadn't been in days, and understood for the first time that surviving wasn't going to be enough. I had to move faster than they expected me to. The ruling came by email, 3 short paragraphs from the clerk's office, and I read it standing in my kitchen with the phone shaking slightly in my hand, for reasons that had nothing to do with fear this time. Delay granted. The judge had sided with Emmett's attorney, ruling that pursuing the partition sale while a related criminal investigation was active could prejudice the outcome of either case, and ordered the civil proceedings paused until the criminal matter reached some resolution. I called my attorney before I'd even finished reading it twice. "I saw it," he said before I could ask. "I'm not going to tell you this doesn't hurt us, Matilda, because it does. It's not an unreasonable ruling on its face. Judges pause civil matters tied to active criminal cases more often than you'd think. But it pushes us past the court date we already had, and we go back of the docket once this lifts. There's no telling how long that could take." So they got exactly what they wanted. "For now," he said. "I won't lie to you about that either." I sat down slow at my kitchen table, and something in me gave way that hadn't given way through any of it. Not the footage, not the gas line, not even the moment I understood Emmett's face was behind that mask. This was different. This was the quiet terror of watching the very system I'd trusted to protect me bend, just slightly, in their favor, the same way it had almost let me walk into that house and never walk back out. The detective called an hour later, his voice careful in the way that told me before he said it that this wasn't good news either. "We've got strong physical evidence tying Emmett to the scene," he said. "The gate, the tool marks, the timeline. But Erline's a harder case to build without something direct connecting her to the planning itself. Right now, what we have could unravel Emmett. It doesn't necessarily unravel both of them. Meaning she could walk away from this? Meaning we need something more," he said. "And right now, I don't have it." I sat with that long after we hung up, the house too quiet around me, my resolve from the days before feeling suddenly thin, borrowed, like I'd been leaning on a confidence I hadn't actually earned yet. My phone buzzed on the table. Erlene's name again. I almost didn't answer. Then some old habit, some last thread of needing to know exactly what I was facing, made me pick it up. "I heard about the ruling," she said. And there was nothing careful in her voice this time, nothing performed. "I think it's for the best. Honestly, maybe now we can all just move forward without any more of this." "Move forward," I repeated. "You should really think about what you're doing to this family, Matilda," she said, sharper now, an edge in it I hadn't heard before, not once, not even at the funeral 5 years ago. "Dragging all of us through something like this. Think hard about that." I sat there holding the phone long after she'd hung up, and something in me that had been bending finally stopped. I wasn't waiting on the system to move for me anymore. If they thought this delay had bought them safety, I intended to spend every day of it finding exactly what the detective said he didn't have yet. I called my attorney first thing the next morning and told him what Erline had said, the sharpness in her voice, the edge that hadn't been there before. He was quiet a moment, then asked me a question I hadn't expected. "If she calls you again like that, would you be willing to let her talk? Just talk. You wouldn't have to say much of anything." "You mean record her?" "North Carolina's a one-party consent state," he said. "You're allowed to record a call you're part of without telling the other person. It's legal, and if she says anything close to what she said yesterday, it could matter more than you know." I sat with that a moment, then told him yes. She called 2 days later, and I let it ring twice before I answered. My phone already set to record, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. "I've been thinking about what I said," Erline started, softer now, circling back toward the warmth she usually led with. "I don't want us at odds, Matilda. I really don't." "Then maybe you should tell me why any of this is happening at all," I said, keeping my voice even, giving her room instead of resistance. "You don't understand what it's like," she said, "watching everything just slip away after everything we put into building it. We talked about this so many times before we ever came to see you. Emmett kept saying there had to be a better way to handle it than lawyers and letters. A better way, I repeated, quiet, careful not to push. I told him not like that, she said, and her voice cracked, not with grief this time, but with something closer to panic, like she could hear herself talking and couldn't stop the momentum of it. I told him just scare her, just buy us time. That's all I wanted. I never said. She stopped herself mid-sentence, and I heard the shift happen in real time, her breath catching hard. Matilda, I didn't mean that the way it sounded. It's all right, I said, though nothing about it was all right. My pulse hammering steady and hard beneath a voice I kept flat and calm. I need you to forget I said any of that, she said, faster now, unraveling. I'm just upset. I'm not thinking straight. Please, just forget it. I should go, I said, and I hung up before she could say anything else, sitting there in my kitchen with my hand pressed flat against the counter, the recording still glowing on my screen. 12 minutes and 40 seconds of Erline's own voice laying out exactly what she'd known, exactly what she'd asked for, from the very beginning. I sent the file to my attorney within the hour. He called back before I'd even set the phone down. Matilda, he said, and there was something in his voice I hadn't heard from him yet, urgency wearing the shape of relief. This changes everything. That delay just lost its ground entirely. We can move on both fronts now, the criminal case and the estate. She just handed us exactly what we didn't have. I sat there a long moment after we hung up, feeling the last soft grief I'd carried for this family finally burn away clean, replaced by something I recognize now as clarity, sharp and whole, and entirely my own. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and quiet, and I sat on one side of the aisle while Erline and Emmett sat on the other, close enough that I could hear Erline's breathing, unsteady in a way her voice never used to be. This was the criminal trial. A jury seated to my right, a prosecutor at the front, the case built on the recording, the tool marks, and Garvin's account. Erline's attorney called her to speak first, and she answered every early question with the same composure she'd carried into my kitchen. Weeks ago, soft-voiced, careful, a grieving mother-in-law simply trying to reconcile with family. It almost worked. I watched two jurors nodding along with her. Then the prosecutor played the recording. Her own voice filled the room, tinny through the speaker, but unmistakable. I told him not like that. I told him just scare her. Buy us time. The color drained slowly from her face as she listened to herself. And when it ended, the silence in that room was heavier than anything I'd sat through in weeks. Mrs. Mabry, the prosecutor said, is that your voice on this recording? I was upset, she said, faster now, her composure slipping at the edges. I didn't mean it the way it sounds. I was scared. Did you or did you not discuss a plan with your son to enter Mrs. Mabry's home while she believed you were both traveling home from a reconciliation visit? I never told him to go that far, she said, voice cracking now, all the smoothness gone. I only wanted her scared. I didn't know what he was going to do with the gas line. I swear I didn't know that part. But you knew about the entry, the prosecutor said. You knew about the theft. She didn't answer. She sat there, hands folded tight in her lap, the mask she'd worn since that first phone call finally, fully gone. When they called Emmett, he answered almost nothing. Advised by his own attorney, he invoked his right to remain silent on question after question, his stillness somehow louder than any denial could have been. The judge accepted the tool mark evidence, Garvin's identification, and the recording into the criminal record. The first time everything I'd survived sat fully assembled in one place. Undeniable. Connected. My attorney leaned over once the jury was dismissed for the day and told me quietly that this same record, now entered here, would carry directly into the separate civil hearing already scheduled for the following week, where no jury would sit, Only a judge weighing whether two people who'd tried to take my life should still inherit from it. I didn't say a word through any of it. I didn't need to. I sat there and watched 5 years of grief and a lifetime of quiet family resentment collapse under the weight of their own voices, and something in my chest finally loosened. Not joy exactly, but something close to relief. The understanding that this was no longer only mine to carry. Outside, in the hallway, Erlene caught my eye one last time before her attorney guided her toward the elevator. She looked at me for a long moment, something almost like disgust settling over her features. "You should have just taken the money," she said quietly. I didn't answer her. I just watched her walk away. My attorney called on a Tuesday morning, and I could hear it in the first word he said. Something settled and certain in his voice that hadn't been there in weeks. "Emmett's attorney reached out last night," he said. "They want to talk plea." I sat down slow at my kitchen table, the same table I'd sat at through every piece of this, and let that settle before I said anything. With the recording, the tool marks, Garvin's identification, and now his mother's own testimony placing him at the center of it, my attorney went on. There's not much room left for him to fight this at trial. His attorney knows it. They're trying to get ahead of it now. "What does the plea say?" I asked. "That's the part you need to hear clearly," he said. "He's not just admitting to the break-in. He's admitting the theft and the gas line tampering were part of one single plan, discussed and agreed to beforehand. Not two separate impulses. One plan, start to finish. The airline confirmed it too. He checked in and cleared security with his mother that morning, but he never boarded. Walked out through a side exit and doubled back before your flight even took off. I felt something in my chest go very still, hearing it laid out plain like that. Not an accusation anymore, not evidence we'd had to piece together ourselves, but his own words, finally matching everything we'd already known to be true. "And Erlene's claim that she didn't know about the gas line?" I asked. "His plea contradicts that directly," he said. "He states she was part of the planning conversation where the method was discussed, not just the entry. It's not proof on its own, Matilda. It's his word against hers now, one plea statement, not a verdict. But it's enough to put her earlier statement in serious question, and that's something the civil case can build on. I should have felt something sharper than I did. Anger, maybe, or vindication. Instead, what settled over me was quieter than that, steadier, something closer to the calm of watching a door finally close on something that had been left open far too long. Erline called twice that afternoon. I let both calls go to voicemail. On the third try, I picked up, mostly to see what was left of her. "Matilda, please," she said. No performance left in her voice at all now, just something thin and desperate. "Emmett's attorney is doing this to protect himself. None of what he's saying is fair to me. I need you to understand that." "I understand plenty, Erline," I said. "Please," she said again, and I could hear for the first time that she meant it. Not manipulation this time, just fear, finally catching up to her the way it should have from the beginning. "I have to go," I told her, and I hung up before she could say anything else, feeling nothing crack or waver in me at all. I called my attorney back within the hour and told him exactly what I wanted moving forward. Full pursuit of both fronts. No more waiting on delays or uncertainty. No easing back now that we finally had ground beneath us. I wanted the criminal case pressed all the way through sentencing, and I wanted the civil claim on the remainder interest moving in step beside it, not behind it. "I can get us close on the timing," he said. "Close enough that both could land in the same week, if that's what you want." "That's exactly what I want," I said. He called back 2 days later to confirm it. Emmett's sentencing hearing and the civil hearing on the remainder interest were now set for the same week. Everything I had survived, finally converging toward a single, unavoidable reckoning. The courtroom was full that morning, more people than I expected, and I sat in the front row with my attorney beside me, my hands folded steady in my lap, no shake left in them at all. Emmett stood when the judge called his name, his own attorney beside him, and the reading of the plea took only a few minutes. Attempted murder, breaking and entering, larceny, all of it laid out plain, in language that made 5 months of my life sound smaller than it had felt living through it. Erline sat 2 rows behind him, her plea already finalized separately days earlier, for her role in enabling the attempt, her sentence handed down in a hearing I hadn't needed to attend. When the judge asked if the victim wished to speak, I stood. I hadn't written anything down. I hadn't needed to. 5 years of silence taught me to expect nothing from this family, I said, my voice even, carrying clean through the room. The 3 days they spent in my home taught me something worse. That silence can end for reasons that have nothing to do with love. I welcomed them back into my house, believing grief had finally softened something between us. Instead, I learned grief had only given them time to plan. I looked at Emmett, not with anger, just steadily, the way you look at something you've already finished being afraid of. I don't need you to feel sorry, I said. I need the record to be clear about what actually happened in my home, so no one reads this someday and mistakes it for anything less than what it was. I sat back down. The room stayed quiet a moment longer than courtrooms usually do. The judge handed down Emmett's sentence. Years, spoken plainly, the number landing heavier in the room than I expected it to. Across the aisle, Erline turned toward me one last time, searching my face for something, some crack she could still work with. I gave her nothing. I simply looked back until she looked away first. Outside, on the courthouse steps, my attorney fell into step beside me, a folder tucked under his arm. The civil ruling came down this morning too, he said. Filed separately, decided on its own record, but it's final now. The court barred both Erline and Emmett from any remainder interest in the property. The ruling's clear. A beneficiary who attempts to cause the death of the person whose passing would trigger their inheritance forfeits that interest entirely. It's not part of the criminal sentence. It stands on its own. He tapped the folder. This is the certified copy. Once we record it with the Register of Deeds this week, the title transfers over clean. No. Remainder attached to your name. He handed me the folder, and inside it sat the certified order. The language plain and final. The first real proof that the last thread of that family's claim on anything of mine had been cut for good. I stood there on those steps for a long moment, the late afternoon sun warm against my face, holding a piece of paper that meant more than property now. It wasn't joy I felt, standing there. It was something quieter than that. Older, like a debt finally settled after carrying it so long I'd almost forgotten what it would feel like to set it down. I folded the order carefully and held it against my chest the whole walk back to my car. Weeks passed before the house finally started to feel like mine again. Not in the legal sense. That had been settled on those courthouse steps. But in the quieter way, a place has to earn its safety back after something like this happens inside its walls. I stood in the doorway one evening, home from the grocery store, arms full, and realized I'd stopped checking the driveway before I pulled in, stopped glancing at the side door out of habit every time I passed the hallway. The fear had finally, slowly, let go of its grip on the ordinary parts of my life. Garvin was out on his porch when I came back outside for the last bag, and he waved me over the way he had 100 times over 10 years. Except this time, I actually walked across the yard and sat down in the chair beside him instead of just waving back. "Been a while since you sat still long enough to visit," he said, handing me a glass of sweet tea without asking if I wanted one. "Feels strange," I admitted. "Sitting still?" "Good strange, I hope." "Good strange," I said, and I meant it. We sat there a long while, not saying much. The kind of quiet that only exists between two people who've already said the important things to each other without needing words for it. He'd been the one steady thing through all of it. And I understood now, sitting there, that some debts get repaid simply by staying, by showing up, by choosing to sit on a porch and drink tea like the world hadn't nearly ended in that yard a few months back. A letter came the next morning, official and plain, confirming what I already knew. The civil ruling was finalized in full, every remainder interest stripped clean from the property, no further filings required, no threads left hanging anywhere in the record. I read it once at my kitchen table and then set it in the drawer where Elsie's old paperwork still lived, another piece of him now folded into something settled instead of something owed. I'd thought, months ago, about selling this house, moving somewhere with no history pressing in on every room. Standing in the kitchen that morning, letter tucked away, I understood I didn't want that anymore. This house wasn't a burden any longer. It wasn't a battlefield, or a bargaining chip, or a place haunted by people who'd once used it as a trap. It was simply mine, the way Elsie had always meant it to be before anyone else tried to make it something else. That evening, I sat on my own porch as the sky went soft and orange over the yard, a cup of coffee warm in my hands, and let myself think of Elsie without the weight of his family's betrayal, sitting on top of the memory for the first time since any of this began. Just him. Just the 10 years we'd had. Uncomplicated. The way grief is supposed to feel when nothing else is fighting for space inside it. The house sat quiet behind me. Safe in a way it hadn't been in months. Earned through every hard week it took to get here, rather than simply given back by luck. I stayed out there until the last light went down over the yard, still, steady, finally at peace in the only home I had left.